out this sheet. It's similar to what Mel was giving us, but this one here has a lot more dials that you can dial on. The ones that we've used around here, you can only dial up to about 50 people, and then again, it doesn't have a tracking there, a number to cross off or anything like that. But this one I have, you can call up to like 260 dials, And so if you make that many dials every day, you ought to be able to still get that 554, Maybe, you have to get off of one list and go to the next list, because I call Inspires, I call my Spirit, and then I try to call people kind of call me about properties that I'm selling or something like that. And I just try to make contacts with them on a regular basis. But I'm telling you, man, if you think just dialing people is easy, it's not. Because, again, I bet you in a week's time, you probably could not dial 260 people. That's a lot of dialing, but you're going to get a lot of conversations out of those dials, So if you want to mark that as an activity and say, what did I do today? I dialed 75 people, 75 telephone numbers today. You ought to feel like you did something anyway, along with the other stuff you got going. And so, you understand what I'm saying?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You wasn't listening. So again, that's what we want. We just want activity. We want to be busy doing something every day. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. Just have my activity level high, up, high. All right? Mel, I'm ready, man. Turn it over.
Yes, you are. I see you here. When I get here in the morning, you beat me every day now.
I hope to keep beating you.
Hey, Rodney, I just want to, take my hat off to you, and I don't wear a hat right now, but I've been really impressed with Rodney's work ethics in 2015. He made a commitment to himself, and I can say you're keeping that commitment. Rodney gets here 7:30 in the morning, right?
That's right.
And I've been seeing Rodney leave at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. So, and he's on that phone. So it really works. And then what I see as a result of his work is productivity. I see transactions. Listings taken, escrows opening, escrows closing. So it really makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Awesome, Rodney. Keep it up. Your biggest problem is going to be how many taxes you have to pay.
I like that problem.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Can you turn that light off for me, Virgil, please?
Oh?
Yes. Uh-huh. Hey, can you ask Bonnie if the go-to meeting is on?
Oh.
Thank you. All right. So last week we talked about problem solving with transactions that were on the listing side. And today we're going to talk about solving some problems. And some of these things may be a little bit more advanced for some of you, and for others of you it may be something that you already do, and you may have your own insights as to how you can improve on what we're talking about here today. If you feel like there's something you can contribute, feel free to chime in and give me your thoughts, okay?
Okay.
So let's move on if we can. All right. Hey, Gabriel. So keeping your transaction on track. Remember, we talked about controlling your own destiny, and one of the best ways to control your own destiny really is to prospect. There's no substitute for prospecting. If you prospect on a consistent basis, it's impossible for you not to do more business. It's just literally impossible. Even if you don't even know what you're talking about, just talking to people, you're going to reach a certain number of folks who like you, and they're going to want to do business with you. So prospecting is really key, and that's what you need to do if you want to control your own destiny and not have to worry about somebody else giving you an allowance so you can pay your bills, okay? So here's what I recommend you do. You pray before you start. You pray during the transaction, and you pray after your transaction. And I had the privilege of working with Virgil on one of his transactions not too long ago, And I remember Virgil saying something like, Mel, this transaction's going to cancel. This transaction's going to cancel. It's not going to close. It's not going to close. Okay, your words. It's not going to close. And what did I say to you, Virgil? What's that? I said it's going to close. I said it's going to close. And I started doing those emails where you start praying, because this transaction had a lot of challenges with it, and one of the owners really was just very emotional. And the transaction was projected to close, I believe, around the 4th or 5th of December 2014, and we closed, I want to say, around the 13th of February 2015. So we closed probably 2 months past the time that we were projected to close, right? But we got it closed. And a large part of it was this prayer time. I recall going to meet with your client, Virgil, to get them to sign a grant deed. You're welcome. And thank you for your comments to all the office. I really appreciate that. I remember going to meet with his clients, and I met with his clients, and when I had heard the wife before, she was always yelling and screaming. I could always hear her in the background. When the husband was trying to talk, she'd be yelling and screaming. And so I said, okay, let's see if we can get through to this person here today. So Bonnie was a notary, so we went over to do a mobile notary at their home. And so when I sat down with them after a couple of niceties, complimenting them on their beautiful house, I said, I'm going to do something with you that you might think is kind of weird. They said, what's that? I said, I want to pray with you, because I know I needed something bigger than me to get this lady to be down to earth. So the reality is that I prayed with them, and then the next thing you know, the lady got to be more peaceful. And then she said, we go to church over here at Shepherd of the Hill. So the other side of her came out. Instead of that yelling and screaming side, there was a whole another side that I would just say it only happened because of the prayer. It wasn't because of my experience or anything like that. All right, so remember who you represent in a transaction. How do you know who you represent? You have a disclosure, right? The agency disclosure statement, and you attest to who you're representing. And sometimes what happens in a transaction, sometimes agents forget. They forget who their primary person is that they're representing. And things get kind of cloudy, especially when the agent on the other side of the transaction is so nice. Maybe she's beautiful and you want to make her happy, right? Even though it's not in the best interest of your client. Or maybe he's just a nice guy and you just don't want to disappoint him, and so you forget who your primary responsibility is to. And so you need to remind yourself, who are you representing? Are you representing the seller? Are you representing the buyer? Or you have a dual agency? Or are you representing both of them? Here's one of the things I want you to do to help minimize some of the challenges you have in a transaction. You're the listing agent. Now we're talking about you're the listing side. You're the listing agent. You get an offer. You get multiple offers on your listing. And so one of the things I always do is I say, okay, let me see your pre-approval letter. Now, a pre-approval letter is worth about as much as the piece of paper is written on, right? Sometimes they're not worth much at all. And so what I do is I say, okay, let me have a copy of your FICO scores, because that gives me a little bit better indication. And then the next thing I ask for is, let me have some evidence of your proof of funds. All these things I ask for early on before we even consider accepting their offer. These are preconditions of accepting their offer. I want to make sure we have these things in place so that we can really go sit down with that seller and know that we have a viable buyer. And then the other thing that I do is I asked him, I said, well, I have my own lender. I want your lender to talk to my lender. I don't want to talk to your lender. I want your lender to talk to my lender, because they understand those things that they need to be comparing, right? And so typically what I'll do is I'll ask them to talk to Craig Kobler, Wintrust, right? And then Craig has them give him a copy of their credit application, their loan package, and so they don't have to have their credit run again. Craig can review all those things. look at the numbers, and say, Mel, based on these numbers here, I think that this borrower is not going to make it. Or, Mel, their credit is good enough, but their debt-to-income ratio is not going to make it. So maybe they need to add a co-borrower at the time. All these things should be done early on so that you don't get into a transaction where you got a pre-approval letter, you got the proof of funds, you got good FICO scores, but you don't know enough about that debt-to-income ratio. You don't have a debt underwriting approval, right? And so you get into the transaction, and before you know it, it's getting shaky. Anybody ever have a transaction like that? So here's what I do to minimize some of those uncertainties. I ask for a double application. And I tell them, I'm not trying to get your borrower to go to my lender, because most agents are protective of their client and they have a relationship with their own lender. I tell them up front, I'm not trying to get your client to go to my lender. I just want to make sure that your lender is on the same page with the standards for this industry. And so that's what I do. You need to know your contract. And what I mean by that is that the contract has timelines on it. It has the parties that are in the contract. But it also has how many days for inspection, how many days for loan approval, how many days for preliminary title report, how many days before they're supposed to give you the transfer disclosure and the SPQ. All those things are important. You need to know your contract, and you need to know what conditions or contingencies are a part of your contract so that you can make sure you're staying on track, and that also you're keeping your clients on track with what's going on in their transaction. You don't want to find out, 30 days into the transaction that you should have had the removal of contingencies 15 days earlier. Because now you're vulnerable if that transaction falls apart and another agent starts looking at that, or they get an attorney to look at it, you're going to be very vulnerable because you didn't do your part as the agent representing your client in the best way. Okay? So know the timelines, know the contingencies in your transaction. All right. Disclosures. It's important for us to get the TDS signed up early on. So when I go on my listing appointment, I leave a copy of the TDS. The only thing I fill out is the address of the property on there, and I have the seller fill out the rest of it. But you have a duty to get that TDS to the buyer's agent within 7 days from the time that your offer has been accepted. If you don't, the statutory law, state of California, says that contingency for those other items will not go into effect until you have the transfer disclosure statement communicated to the buyer's or the buyer's agent. So you may have gone past 15 days, maybe you had a 10-day inspection, now it's 15 days, but for some reason your seller did not complete the transfer disclosure statement herein. You did not give a copy of the transfer disclosure statement to the buyer's agent. Guess what? That 15 days that you've already gone by doesn't amount to a hill of beans, okay? Because the law says that the buyer must have, on a 1 to 4 unit transaction, must have a transfer disclosure statement. And that's when the timeline starts winding down. You all with me? Okay, so some of the other required ones is a natural hazard report. You all know the state of California requires this. This is not an optional one. This is required by the state. The buyer can pay for it or the seller can pay for it, but either way it needs to be delivered to the buyer. Okay? Earthquake report, lead-based paint, these are all things that are important addendums to have and disclosures to have. And how many of you have ever had to execute a notice to perform? Okay. What are your thoughts on notice to perform?
I have mixed feelings on them. I think they absolutely protect the client and is in the client's best interest. But unless there's been, this is just my advice to the client, unless there's been no communication, it just looks like the other side is not doing what they're supposed to. In that case, I would, recommend that the client issue a notice to perform to protect their interest, and then we move forward with the transaction. If they have not been, then there's, it's the same advice to the client, but it's the only caveat is that it can sometimes on a good transaction change the, the interactive dynamic and cause the other people to then start to have problems. So I never let it go too long past the date, all contingencies being removed, whatever the other issue is. But I'm a little cautious when things are going well to issue one.
All right, so anybody else? Comments on notice to perform? All right, so the notice to perform, yes, Lillian?
You're representing the seller.
Yeah, when I represent
In this case, we're talking about you representing the seller, but even if you represent the buyer, you can issue a notice to perform. Okay? And a lot of agents take the position that a notice to perform is an adversarial kind of a document that you're issuing to the other side. And the reality is it's not. It's not adversarial. All you're doing is you're trying to make sure if the other parties on the other side of the transaction is not performing, they're not staying within the timelines, then what you want to do is you want to have a conversation with that agent. And you want to find out what's causing your delays. But if you want to really protect yourself and protect your client, you need to at some point ask your client to issue a notice to perform. Now, at the bottom of your purchase agreement, I believe you have a number of hours that you can use, 48 hours, 24 hours. You can stipulate what that timeline is going to be, but you need to, at some point, issue a notice to perform. It is not an adversarial document, but what it does is it gets the other side's attention, and what it does is it sets you up for the next set of things that you can do if the parties on the other side are not cooperating. I've had situations where the buyer's agent is not communicating, or the buyer is not signing documents, and you're trying to make sure this transaction is going ahead, and maybe you have multiple offers on this transaction. You don't want to get hung up with this buyer if they're not going to perform. And so what you do is I call them and say, look, I need to know what your buyer doing. Are they going to move forward or not? And then if they don't give me a good answer, I'm going to say, I'm going to have to advise my client to issue a notice to perform. So I'm warning you now. So I talk about it first before I just blast one off and send it over to them. But I tell them, I'm going to advise my client to send you a notice to perform. And so the notice to perform actually can be sent within 48 hours prior to the timeline that the contingencies are supposed to be removed. So it doesn't have to happen after, but up to 48 hours prior to the time that your contingency should be removed, right? And so let's say you get to this point and the agent said, well, my buyer still wants to buy, but, they're trying to work something out and get rid of this tax lien, and, they need to get that all cleared up. They didn't know they had it. Even when they ran the credit report, it didn't come up until it came out in the title. Things like this happen. And so what you may do then is you may go back to your seller and you talk to the agent and say, perhaps what we should do is request an extension. Request for an extension of time on this offer or an extension of time on the contingency removal. Because your goal is to get those contingencies removed as quickly as possible so that you can have a certain transaction that has some certainty that it's going to close, right? But at the same time, you don't want to get into an adversarial relationship with the other agent, but you do want to protect your client. You have to protect your client because at the end of the day, if you ever go to court, the courts are going to look at, are you really protecting your client, or were you just trying to keep that relationship with that other agent who you hang out with at the gym? See? So this is important for you to do, is to have that communication, have that conversation, and perhaps at this time you might want to talk to your seller and say, well, they tell us it's going to take about 5 business days for them to get what they need, this release of lien from the IRS. So why don't we give them an additional 5 days if that's okay with you, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller. And then if that's the case, you have the escrow prepare an extension for escrow, and then you don't have a problem. And then you look, when that 5 days is up, you have to see, okay, where are we at? Do we have that removal of lien from the IRS or not? And so, but it's your job to stay on top of it for your client. Now, if you get to a point where you got a transaction where the party on the other side is just not responsive, you ever have an agent that you had to get a bounty hunter to find them?
That's right.
You had that? Yeah, agents don't follow up, don't call you back, or maybe they went on vacation, didn't tell you, so you're pulling your hair out, because you want to find out what's going to go on so you can advise your client, and the other agent is just not being responsive, then what you may have to do is have a demand to close escrow. In other words, you send out a demand saying, we demand that you close escrow. Right? So now you're putting all the documents in place to get your client out of this transaction if it's not going to go forward. And so it's your duty to protect your seller. If you're the listing agent, your duty is to protect who?
Seller. The
seller. And so you may think, oh, I don't want to be mean to the other agent. Is so nice. I mean, she took me out to Starbucks, and she brought me a Frappuccino, and I don't want to be mean to her. You know what? You got to take care of your client, because at the end of the day, if you don't, and if it ever goes to a litigation or a mediation, someone is going to begin to question your relationship with your client, and did you really do your best? Was your duty a fiduciary duty to your client? Make sense?
Yes.
All right. So after, one of the other things that I do in a transaction, if I find out that this buyer is taking a lot longer and it's costing my seller money, then what I may talk to my seller about is I say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you still want to stay in this transaction? Well, it depends. Are this guy going to close? I said, well, it looks like they want to close. They seem to be motivated. But you know what? Maybe what we should do is maybe we should have a cost associated with every day that they delay the closing. And so that cost is called a per diem, right? It's like a penalty. And when I used to do a lot of REOs, we had a lot of, almost every contract we had with REOs had a per diem on there. So after so many days after escrow is supposed to close and it doesn't, then this per diem kicks in, right? And it kicks in, and so what happens is now your seller may not be harmed as much financially with this transaction. Put it on vibrate.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So your seller may not be as much harmed because they have a per diem. Right, Virgil?
Yep.
And your seller's going to be happy that, oh, wow, this guy's really looking after my interests.
Huh?
How
much did the buyer spend? $2,500.
$2,550 on that transaction. And guess what? The seller on Virgil's transaction, they were like really upset. And we told them that the lender was going to pay $2,000 on behalf of the buyer. And they were like, we want that $2,000. We want that $2,000. So I was, I felt like, man, are they being reasonable or not? And so after having a direct conversation with the seller, I found out that they were not trying to get the per diem and the $2,000. They were just trying to get the $2,000. So there was a communication block there where initially it sounded like the seller wanted the $2,000 plus the per diem. So when I told them that the per diem was actually $2,550, oh my, the whole demeanor changed. Oh, we get to keep $2,550? Yes. Oh, we would have been happy with $2,000, but thank you. You see? But we're not trying to take all the buyer's money. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the buyer is motivated and they have what we call skin in the game. Yes.
Can't you also see if the lender himself will pay that per diem and not so much the buyer?
Well, in this case, the lender was willing to pay it on behalf of the buyer. The lender offered to pay $2,000 to the buyer for the per diem. But that's a lender's choice.
Exactly.
Right? Now, in this case, a large part of the delay in this transaction was lender-related. So they felt like more obligated to pay that. But you may have lenders who feel like, well, I did my part. Why should I pay you anything?
I know.
Right? But, yeah, sure, you can ask the lender to do that. And it depends on what kind of relationship you have with that lender. Any questions before we move on?
Okay.
Any other comments?
The only other comment I would make is that you spoke of adversary of the position with the other agent, and this could be, adversarial. So I guess we should be taking notes on all of this. So again, if there is a problem later on, you want to be able to refer back to specific who said what and who did what on what day, right?
Document your file.
Right.
Yeah, document your file because, 6 months, 2 years down the road, you won't remember all this stuff.
Right.
but if you have a note in your file, we just had this conversation with the agent. And I think, what I try to do is before I send something in writing to the agent that may be adversarial, I want to have a conversation with them first. I want to see, can we work this out? I just think about Rodney King. Can we all get along? That's what I think. Can we just get along, right? And usually if you have a conversation with them ahead of time, you can get it worked out. I will tell you, I've been in this business, in 2 weeks, it'll be 37 years for me in this business. And one thing I've learned being in the business that long, if you have a motivated buyer, a motivated seller, and at least one motivated agent, transactions will close. Sometimes one of the agents is not so motivated. So, I had a transaction that we closed a week or so ago, and the agent I was representing the buyer. The listing agent didn't seem to be as motivated. They were out in Orange County. The property's in Pacoima. My client's here. My clients came to me as a result of a home buyer's workshop that I conducted. And so my clients were professors at Cal State Northridge, professors at Cal State Dominguez. So that's my referral base, right? My pipeline. So I don't want to mess them up. So end of the day, the agent representing the seller wasn't very communicative. And when they did communicate, their language was so cryptic that I could hardly understand what they were saying. And so I sent out a notice when I found out that there were tenants still living in the property and escrow was supposed to close next week, and they had rented out rooms. And so I wanted to know, how can I help this seller get those folks out of that room? Because I told my buyer, we're not going to be signing, I don't recommend you sign your loan documents or have your loan funded. You can sign the documents, don't have your loan funded until that place is vacated. Right? So that's what I advise my buyer. And so we went by the property and it looked like nobody had moved anything. Here we are 3 or 4 days before escrow is scheduled to close. So I sent out an email. I talked to the agent on the phone and I said, I want to get you to give me written authorization to communicate with your seller. Now, I could have just said, can I talk to your seller? They could have said, yeah, you can talk to my seller. But if I don't have anything backing it up, if it ever comes back to a grievance hearing, I have no evidence. So I waited for them to send me an email. They sent me an email. Thank you so much. God bless you. Please talk to my client. So I talked to the client, and guess what? And just through the miracle of God, the client got all those folks out of the house. We talked to them on Thursday. Monday, we did our walkthrough. Everybody was out of the house. It was amazing. It was amazing. But if I had not had the opportunity to talk directly to that seller, I may have had some challenges because the other agent didn't really care as much. I cared a lot. So there was one motivated agent we knew. Yes.
Did you get any quick pushback from the agent when you asked to speak with his client?
No, not at all. They were so happy. They sent me an email saying, thank you, you're so nice, God bless you. They were very happy because they had lost some kind of relationship or something with that client of theirs. And so they were happy that I was there willing to take it up and step it up and do what needed to be done. They're down in like Santa Ana, and they weren't going to drive up to Pacoima to make this happen. So, no, they were very pleased that I was able to communicate with their client. And they sent me an email. That was my documentation. I got an email from them saying, you have permission to communicate with my client. I do not recommend that you communicate with another agent's client without having something in writing. Don't go with this verbal stuff because people have very short memories when it comes to a hearing later on. I never told you that. We never had that conversation. And so if you don't have some kind of text or email communication or some written letter saying it's okay, don't do it. All right? Anything else?
I put my hand up.
Yeah,
I was going to ask you, sometimes I've had situations where you can't get the other agent, and it's like you're almost forced to talk to their client. And so, when that kind of situation comes up, what would you tell us to do? Still don't talk to them?
Well, I would not. I would not. If the other agent has abandoned their client, and that client is reaching out to you, then yes, you can communicate with them. But if the other agent has not abandoned, and I think you can look up some of the rules under the ethics rules to see what it means to abandon your client. I think if they stop responding to their client within so many days, it's considered abandonment. But if the client reaches out to you, you can talk to them, but you cannot initiate that conversation where you call them, you email them, you text them.
Right. So if they start asking you questions, you can start kind of more or less relating back.
Yes, you can, but I would always have this condition. I would say, but you should talk to your agent about it.
Right.
I would always throw that in. You should talk to your own agent about this. And sometimes I say, well, my agent, I haven't talked to them. They're in Tahoe, skiing, and they won't be back for another week. Then, but I always try to get the other agent to give me permission, and then I always refer that client to go back to their agent because that's who's representing them. And I never try to malign the other agent. Oh, what's wrong with your agent? They're a deadbeat. Never do that because it's unethical for you to speak badly about another realtor. It's unethical, even if they are a crook.
That's right.
You can't say that, right? You can make it, you can't say it. All right. So if I'm representing a buyer, review the disclosures in a timely fashion with the buyer, ensure all the inspections have been ordered. And so maybe you're a buyer's agent, and maybe there's no termite inspection. And your contract calls for a termite inspection. Remember I said know your contract?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it calls for a termite inspection, but maybe it says that the seller is not going to pay, but you still are entitled to the inspection report. So you need to talk to that agent and say, hey, did you order that? Did you order the NHD? Did you order a termite inspection? Is there a request for a mold inspection? Whatever the inspections are, make sure that somebody's ordering them, and you need to talk to that other agent to make sure that they do their part. Now, if they say that no, the seller's not going to provide one, you have to do it yourself, then you do it. Okay? All right. Ensure all inspections have been ordered and reviewed. So here's what happens sometimes. The agent has an inspection done by a certified inspector or a licensed contractor. They send the report to the buyer. And the buyer don't know how to read it. And then you send it to the buyer, and then you don't even ask the buyer, well, did you read it? You have any questions about it? Do you know what it means? So you're just, I sent it to him. That's not good enough. You have to take on responsibility as the agent to help them understand what that inspection report is saying. What I do is I ask them to call the inspector. I say, here's the phone number, here's the email address for the inspector, reach out to them. If you have any questions, you need clarifications, talk to them. And that way it's not coming from me who's non-technical when it comes to these kinds of things. It's coming directly from the person who prepared the report. All right, remove inspection contingencies only when all the disclosures have been given you. Do not remove all the contingencies unless you get all the disclosures, right?
Correct.
Don't remove the inspection contingency if you have one, if you don't have the inspection report, right? These are things that are just no-brainer things, but if you're a brand new agent, you may not know that. So remove loan contingencies only when the loan has been fully approved.
I have a question.
Yes.
But let's say only contingency has been done except
The loan contingency.
Yeah.
Okay.
What you do.
Mm-hmm. If everything else has been done, repeat your question.
Not except the loan contingency.
And who do you represent, the buyer or the seller?
Buyer.
Oh, you represent the buyer. So everything is removed except for that. Well, it depends. I'm going to try to, if I'm representing the buyer, I'm going to try to get that contingency to be strung out as long as I can, because my job is to protect the buyer.
Right.
If I'm representing the seller, I'm going to try to get those contingencies met as quickly as possible. So that's why you have to remind yourself, who do you represent? If I'm representing the buyer, I'm trying to give them as much time as they need. If I'm representing the seller, I'm going to try to abbreviate that time and cut it down to exactly what the contract calls for. Does that answer your question?
Okay, but some agents say, well, we need that loan contingency right away, or
They want it removed, right?
it's already, it's been overdue, or
Well, that happens sometimes, and then I have to go back to my lender and find out, well, what's holding it up. So I'll communicate with the lender and find out what do you need in order for you to get a fully approved loan without any conditions other than maybe, conditions that are easily met in escrow, like a title report or something like this, or an appraisal review. So I'm going to do my best to get that lender to tell me what's holding up the final loan approval. And you know, you can get approval, but it could be a conditional approval. Most of the approvals these days are conditional approval. In other words, they're conditioned upon certain other things happening. Maybe they got all the debt ratio in, but maybe they need a outstanding bill that was paid off. Or maybe they need to pay down a bill. Or maybe they need to get a copy of a lien release. It could be a number of things that they have. Maybe the appraiser has to go back out and re-inspect. These are all conditions that a lender could put on a transaction, and I try to find out what those are, and I communicate with my clients what those things are so they're not in the dark about it. Okay? Does that help?
Well, what I did is before I let my buyer sign, I have to put the lender first.
Sign what? Sign the removal contingency?
Right.
Well, yeah, I'll do that. And I asked the loan officer, is it wise? Are you absolutely sure you're going to be able to do this loan? And if they say, yeah, we can do this loan, then I'll tell my client, okay, they're sure, but you know, there's no absolute guarantee, so you're taking somewhat of a risk. But if you really want this house and the other agent is insisting that you get this done, you have to make that decision, Mr. Buyer. And if I think it's a questionable one, if I don't know the lender and never worked with it before, I would say, no, I wouldn't do it. But if I know the lender and have worked with that lender before and they performed before, I will give them the go-ahead, in my opinion. Right? Okay. Anybody else? All right, we're almost done. So keep in touch with your seller and your buyer's lender, your escrow on a weekly basis. This is where we fall apart. You know, we get into a transaction, we're so excited, we got an offer accepted, we're moving along the path, and we don't keep the seller or the buyer advised of what's going on. In the beginning of the transaction, at least once a week, you need to touch base with your client. And as you get closer toward the end of the transaction, it should be on a daily basis. In the beginning, a week. Maybe you have a 60-day escrow. You don't have to call them every day, but once a week. But as I'm getting closer, I want to get my client, I want to advise them this contingency is due. This one is, you know, we need to remove that contingency. And then you can remove some contingencies. For example, you may remove, for example, the physical inspection contingency. But maybe you're not removing the roof, you know, something else, some other part of the inspection. Or maybe you're not removing the lender contingency, right? So you all know what these contingency forms are. You can check the box as to which ones you're removing, right? Yes.
Well, also, you know, I'm just referring on escrow. I mean, if you're representing the seller, make sure to use the in-house escrow.
Well, bless your heart.
No, this is it.
Go for it.
Right there, that mail is helping me. This is what happened. After mail talk to the seller, he give that whatever ID. We filed it the same day, recorded the same day. The seller get the check, then proceed the same day.
Yeah.
So in-house.
They're happy. The same day, three items.
There's no template, Mel, in cards, all the documents that you can put the timelines you need, write your own, pencil your own dates, and so you can see, you know, the transaction and kind of follow it like that.
No, there's not. But what I'm having a meeting with our escrow officers, and one of the things I want them to do is go through the contract with the agent at the beginning and look at those timelines, and then write a list of what those timelines are, and say, okay, on January the 25th, your contingency for inspection is going to be due. On January 23rd, your preliminary title report contingency should be removed. So it makes it easier for the agent, and the agent can put it into their system where they have an alarm reminding them, oh, this contingency is due today.
But couldn't you make that into like a sheet?
Yeah, what I'm saying is I'm going to talk to our escrow officer about making that a sheet that they issue with the escrow instructions to you, so that you have a heads up, and it'll be easy for you to remember what days things need to be paid attention to. Yes, Mark?
That's a great idea. I was going to say something you also might consider. Are you comfortable with or familiar with Excel?
Yeah, right.
You might use Excel because whenever we have a case where we're on the buyer side and we don't have our escrow, then you'll still have the need for those things. So Excel might be a good way to do that.
Yeah.
And put it at the beginning and
Exactly. And every time you look in the folder, you can see that you can pull it out.
just keep it on your
Check it out, keep it on your computer, right? Which is probably the easiest, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else, any other comments? All very good comments here. All right, thank you, Virgil, for all your help. Follow timeline.
One more.
Yes.
I want to say,
No problem.
when I delivered that check, because it delivered to us, when I delivered at 6 o'clock in the evening, I met my wife, instead of screaming at me, she shook my hand.
Wow.
She kissed you. She kissed you?
Well, we knew we had a motivated seller, and we knew the buyer signed loan documents at least 2 times, and one time they came in on a Saturday. So we knew we had a motivated seller, we knew we had a motivated buyer, and we knew we had motivated agents.
Right.
Virgil was motivated, the other agent was motivated too, right, Virgil?
Right.
So, when I see things like that, I'm pretty certain that the transaction is going to close when everybody's motivated. It's just that if you have a motivated buyer and the seller's not motivated, or a motivated seller and the buyer's not motivated, then you're going to have challenges in the transaction. Okay? Yes, Gabriel.
You mentioned same-day recordings. So that's the responsibility of title. Usually there's a lag between when the wire comes in and it settles it and they're just dispersed the next day, then you record the following day. So a special recording where you can do everything simultaneously is really up to the title company within Los Angeles County to organize that, and the reps that are involved in getting that to the window paying for those transfer taxes. Ventura County, Orange County, they allow same-day recordings. LA County does not through the title company, which means someone physically has to take those docs and pay for them at the window.
And they did that.
Yeah.
They did that. I think the agent representing the buyer actually did that. They went down and paid those documents.
It wasn't my,
Hmm?
it's my title.
No, but what I'm saying is that I believe the buyer's agent went down to make sure those documents were paid for at the county recorder.
Oh, yeah.
So the county transfer, city transfer taxes, recording fees all have to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the size of the sales price, it can get pretty locked in.
All right, so again, just a summary, always remember who you're representing. If representing the seller, explain all the terms of the submitted offer. So you get an offer, and as a listing agent, you're going to get multiple offers oftentimes with the inventory being as tight as it is, right, Rodney? And so explain to your client what does FHA mean to them as a seller. Sometimes sellers don't know. Explain to them what a VA offer means to the seller, right? In this case, in many cases, the FHA, it's like a no-brainer. It's no big deal. But in the case where there's improvements that were done without permits, things that don't meet the health and safety codes, the FHA is going to be concerned because they have to insure that loan. And so you need to advise your seller at the beginning of the transaction before they accept the offer, well, is your house in this condition? Try to find out, is everything up to code? Everything been permitted? So that this doesn't become a problem later. I think we did not find out in this transaction that the seller did some improvements without permits. And so they didn't want to take responsibility for their part in it, and they were causing part of the problem because the lender now had the appraiser go out and had to re-inspect the property because there were improvements that were made without a permit. On a VA offer, you know that the seller pays the escrow fees for the VA offer. You know that, right? So the seller may ask you, why should I, what's a VA offer? What impact does it have on me? You tell them. You're going to be responsible for paying the buyer's closing costs. And let them know, because that could make a difference of a few $1,000s, and they may be upset with you asking you, why don't you pay it? Because you didn't tell me, right? So you need to let them know in the beginning of the transaction, Lillian, that they are going to be responsible for additional costs for that buyer, especially if it's a veteran buyer. So, but at the same time, that seller may say, you know what, my kids were in the Army, or I served in the Marine Corps, so I want to help a veteran. So you know what, I'll still do it. I'll do it because I want to help a vet. Yes.
Is there issues if 2 offers come in, one's VA, one's conventional, and they know the ramifications of having to pay more fees as a seller than wanting to use the conventional? Well,
I think it really comes down to the seller and their feelings about that. I know last year we represented a buyer who wanted to buy a property and made an offer, and we made an offer above asking price. Another buyer came along who made an offer at asking price, and the seller said, you know, we thank you for your offer, but we're going to accept this other offer because it's a veteran, and they want to buy it. And so even though we're going to pay more money, we still want to support a veteran. And so, did you hear that, Cynthia?
Yes, I did.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it can. It just depends on the seller. If somebody hates the military, then, you know, probably won't work. But overall, I think a lot of folks are more sensitive to veterans now. Explain the impact of your offer, you know, an offer that's all cash versus an offer that's a you know, low down payment. I explained to them, for example, if I get an offer with a $1,000 deposit versus an offer that came in with a 3% deposit, I'm going to tell the seller, this buyer may have some problems here. They can't even come up with a 3% deposit, you know, so maybe we should consider the other offer.
Yeah.
Or maybe we should counter back that they have to increase their deposit. Okay? Yes, Rodney.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And listen, a lot of times you see agents say no FHA on the sale that they have, the property they have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there a fine line, or again, what's the line as far as telling them another property should be an FHA property?
Oh, you represent the buyer or the seller?
The seller, I'm representing the seller.
Well, here's what I do. If I'm representing a seller, I try to get them to be open to all offers, FHA, VA, whatever.
Yeah.
And so what I say to them is that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, let me walk through the house with you. Let me see if there's anything about this house that may be a red flag that could cause a problem for FHA. Maybe they have a room that was added and the ceiling is 7 feet tall instead of 9 feet 6. And so that could be a problem. And so I tell them, I say, you know, we may have to tear down that room. I let them know up front if I think it's going to be a challenge or not. And this is just based on my experience of years of going through, and I cut my teeth on FHAs and Pacoima, man. I mean, that was when FHA was hard. I mean, FHA is easy now, before it was like really, really hard. And so I just advise the seller as I walk through the property what things that we can do now. For example, I've seen situations. We had a property last year that we represented a seller on in Pacoima on Defoe. And the patio was infested with dry rot and termites. And so I told the seller, I said, you know, we got a termite inspection. I wanted to know what it's going to cost. And so the inspector was saying, well, you know, to rebuild this patio is going to cost a couple $1,000s. And so I went to my seller and I said, why don't we just get somebody over here to demolish it? So we just demolished it. We got rid of that part of the patio, and, you know, the buyer never knew because we took care of it early on in the process before it even went on the market. So those are the kind of things you do as an experienced agent to help your client avoid problems that could occur later, okay? But you guys are experienced. I always walk around the property with my client, right?
But you almost have to know what FHA, like you said, one time you're hard, now you're not.
They're much easier now, but, you know, what we can do is have Craig come and explain to us what the nuances are for an FHA and a VA offer so that we can be up to speed on. I know because I've done a lot of those transactions, and you guys think it would be worth it for him to come in and explain to us what those are? Yeah. Okay, so we'll do that. He's on a little trip with his wife right now for being a top loan officer for his company. All right, so explain the impact of the terms. Are all the inspections of the seller is contractually responsible for? So I order the termite inspection when I get the listing. Why do you say why? Even if my seller's not paying for the work, because a lot of agents will come in and use that as a way to negotiate a better term for their buyer. Oh, this is going to cost $10,000. So I get an inspection up front. It may cost $75 for the inspection. And when that buyer writes their offer and they're saying, we want a $5,000 credit for this, and we'll say, no, you know, really it's not going to cost you that much. You know, it's going to cost you this based on this inspection report here. So I order the termite inspection right up front, and I order the NHD, things like that, so it won't be a problem, okay? All right. All right, so when representing the buyer, stay in touch with your buyer weekly, keep in communication with them on a daily basis, and as you get closer to the end of the transaction, you know, contact them every day. It's an exciting time, but it's also a nervous time for buyers. So you want to hold their hands, and I'll tell you, the more time you spend with them as you get closer to the transaction, it can be kind of tense at times, but they're going to be really appreciative of your service, that you are not just in it for your money, that you're really trying to help them through. And I tell them, I said, look, I'll hold your hand all the way through the transaction, even after it closes. Bonnie and I closed one a week ago. After the transaction closed, I reached out to the buyer and I said, hey, let me know if you're going to have any work done on this house. You know, if you need somebody else to give you bids on some of the work. And so they said, well, I already have a contract. I said, okay, if you don't need it, that's fine. I get a text from, hey, can you send that contractor over here? So I called two persons who were not contracted, but they were people that had done work with before. And so I knew of their work, and I had them both go over to the property with the seller. I introduced the seller to both of them, and I said, okay, Mr. Seller, it's up to you now. You walk them through what you want them to do. They'll give you a written bid. You choose what you want. I'm not getting any money from this part. I'm just trying to help you. And that seller says, thank you so much for going the extra mile. Really, thank you so much. And so that's what we want to do. We want to get people into a home, but don't just abandon them when you get your escrow check. There we are. We're all closed out. All right, any questions or comments about anything?
I have a quick thing.
Yes.
We put together just a quick review questionnaire on the sales training meetings, and just if you guys could give us your anonymous feedback, that would be great, so we can make sure that we're kind of giving you guys what you want the way you want it. So if you could just take your time to fill it in, and then you can just put it in my box. Don't put your name on it, and we just want to review and like I said, make sure that we're giving you guys. Make sure that we're giving you guys, something of value.
Make sure you want to hear Rodney a little bit more. So Rodney, 5 minutes, give it 20 minutes,
Mickey Mouse and Minnie. All right. Hey, Gabriel, do you have anything to say?
Thank you for allowing me to come in and just be a part of this. I listen to you every time I come here. Mel's really big about getting a meeting, set an appointment where you can actually physically sit across from someone and talk to someone. And I've been thinking about that a lot because even in my line of work, it's very similar to yours. We're all about going after individual agents. You're going after consumer. I'm trying to get in front of you. You're trying to get in front of your consumer. Marketing pieces sometimes work. The phone calls, to initiate that conversation work. But unless I can really get in front of you and talk to you, and you can see me and physically talk to me, the chances of me getting your business are probably non-existent. It's just a small select percentage of what actually works out there. I mean, certain companies that put together these statistical data on what works and what doesn't. We talk a lot about marketing pieces and spending a ton of money to get that into an area within a bar. Literally, it's almost less than 2% of business that comes out of that. Most of your business is from referrals to family, friend, neighbors introducing you. And what that means is you got to physically be out there getting those contacts, just like me, physically being out there and knocking on doors and getting in front of an agent and trying to provide a value to that agent. And the only way I can do this is if I talk to you. You just see something on paper, it's just paper. So I'm trying to follow what your mentor is teaching you guys, and to me, that's the only real true way to build a business. So if I, outside of titles, I'm here to help you grow in that area. But if you take away anything, just consistently go out there and just consistently try to get meetings, get in front of people. That's all that matters. So,
set appointments. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw this. Did any of you see this?
What is that?
Yes, sir.
The brochure that Floyd Rima had prepared for himself, so take a look at that. May be of some value to you on how you can grow your own business. Just let people know who you are, a little bit about yourself, some personal things in there. So, yes.
By the way, if you're looking for a self-promotional template like this that you want to develop and create your own, that website, Breakthrough Broker, has self-promotional templates where you can do it all for free. And they email you the PDF, high definition PDF. So your role is just to develop the material inside of here.
Breakthrough Broker.
This is really good.
Yeah, that
Is it? Who's that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I was going through some research the other day, and I came across something that was pretty staggering for me, looking at what prices have done over the last 40 years. And the average property, the median price property in California in 1968, who knows what it was?
1968,
Mm-hmm.
34,000,
35.
3480.
24.
23,210. Is that amazing?
68.
1968. Just think if you bought properties back then.
You had a rich man right
You
now.
bought Malibu.
Oh my God, 23,000. And nationwide at that time it was 20,000. So California was a little bit ahead. And then look at this, the highest values that we've seen in the last couple decades in California. What do you think the highest median price was?
What year?
I can give you the year if you want.
Oh, what did you say? What was the question?
What's the highest median price in the state of California since the last decade, the last 20 years?
All of California, where's the highest median?
Right. No. Statewide, what is the highest median value?
Statewide, the highest median value on the
San Francisco?
280.
I mean,
No, the highest median.
Oh, the highest. The highest in all California, bro. San Francisco included, and
It includes Palmdale and Victorville and everything else.
and all that stuff, right? 850.
Not quite. In 2007, we had the highest values statewide. It was 560,000.
Oh, okay.
560,000. That's the median price. So the average price is probably higher than that, but that was the median price back then. So it's just amazing. I have this thing here. You might want to pass it around. So if you guys want it, you can make copies of it. You want to show your client that real estate is really a good investment, and if they buy it for the long haul and just hold on to it, they'll be okay. Yes.
well, this is my own experience. 1973, that's when I bought my first house.
How much?
42,000.
42,000.
It's a brand new home.
Wow.
4 bedrooms, 2 bath, about 7,500 square feet flat.
Wow.
Tile rock. Right there on Short DeSoto.
Really?
1973.
Wow.
42,000.
1973.
Yeah.
I wish I could have
You know how
afforded it.
much is my escrow? 1,000.
You're kidding.
Escrow figure.
Wow. Okay, we're all done. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Pardon? Why did I have that up there? Oh, it's just sample. You don't need it.
How you doing?
Running the floor, they say.
It's going to be on our website, so if you want to go to the website tomorrow, it'll be all up there. This is a sample transaction. Mhm. You pay attention, huh?
Thank you, Mel.
Oh, you're welcome.
Let me make a copy just real quick.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay,
please.
I'll bring it right back.
All righty.
And how you doing with that big project? Is it coming together for you?
Who's that?
Don't you have like a $40 million transaction you working on?
No, it's bigger than that, but
Ooh, yeah.
it's moving slowly.
That's kind of like I expected to move slow. Let me trade this seat. But okay, as long as it's got hope light, what's it called?
Yeah. Yeah, it's his personal thing. It's a little personal brochure.
That's a nice brochure. It's not all my business and father.